Hello, everyone.
Hi, Veronica. How are you? This is Elizabeth. Hello, Veronica.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Larissa Packer. I'm part of the grant team. I'm based in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, and I will be facilitating this workshop today. Olá a todos e todas. Mi nombre es Larissa Packer.
Hello, everyone. My name is Larissa Packer. I am a member of the grain team and I'm based in Rio de Janeiro. I'm going to be the facilitator for this meeting today.
Welcome to everyone. Bienvenidos a todas y todos.
Welcome, everyone.
While the people are entering in the room, I will put in here in the chat some instructions to all of you select your option of translation, okay? Yo voy a poner acá en el chat las instrucciones generales para la traducción.
I'm putting general instructions in the chat right now so that everyone is able to choose the language they would like to hear. So I'm just copying the instructions now.
So first of all, we invite you to click on a picture of a globe, a little globe, right below your screen. When you click on it, you will see the translation options in English, Spanish, and Portuguese. Portuguese, no, and French. Then you select the language you want to translation in. Entonces, las personas que están adentrando, en primer lugar, les invitamos a que hagan un clic.
So for those of you that are just entering the room now, please click on the little globe at the bottom of your screen. And there you will see all of the various languages that are being interpreted today. And you can choose either English, French, or Spanish as you wish. I put Portuguese in the chat because I speak Portuguese, but in truth, we've only got 3 options today: English, French, and Spanish.
Now we have 74 people here, and we put the instructions of the translations. And we invite you to select the interpretation, the translation language, your preference to hear this workshop. If someone have some problem, you can write here in the chat, okay? Let's try. Do you, there is a live on ETC's Facebook too. And are you, están logrando acceder a la interpretación?
Have people been able to access the interpretation? Take a moment to take a look and maybe give us a thumbs up. Samir, Sylvia, you've all been able to access interpretation? Okay.
write in the chat, okay? We would like to, I will speak in Spanish now, okay? For the better, okay? Nosotros gostaríamos de antemano agradecer a los traductores.
We would like to thank the interpreters, and also we would ask that for all of the speakers to be sure to speak clearly today so that the interpreters are able to do a good job of interpreting. So our interpreters today are Kat Kendler, Viviana Tipiana, Raymond Robitaille, and Peter Feldstein. Thank you very much for being here with us today and for making sure that everyone is able to understand this very important topic that we're discussing today. So on behalf of GRAIN and ETC Group, we would like to welcome all of you and let you know that it is a great pleasure to be working with La Via Campesina as well, and to be celebrating 25 years of food sovereignty struggles. We're also celebrating the International Day of Food Sovereignty and the struggles of rural peoples. It is extremely important right now for us to understand the need for food sovereignty while we are seeing crises deepen around the world. So in this workshop that we have called Digitalization of Food Systems and Food Security, we are going to be trying to look carefully at the digitalization of agriculture. And we will be looking at how major corporations are working and look at what their major impacts are on family nutrition and food sovereignty. We will be together for the next 2 hours. First of all, we are going to be hearing from Jim Thomas from ETC Group. In about 20 minutes, he will be talking about digital capitalism and its vision for transforming food systems. After, we will be hearing from Devlin Kuyek and Kartini Samon from GRAIN. They're going to be talking more about the consequences for food sovereignty movements. After that, we will have people from the ground. 6 people from different countries and different regions are going to be talking about resistance and the possibilities or the opportunities for peasants to use these technologies. You can communicate with us over the chat on Zoom and also over Facebook. We're going to try to summarize the main questions that we get and give presenters time to answer these questions. If there is time, we will open the floor for a Q&A session that will be open with all participants. So I would like to ask Soledad Vogliano, who has recently joined ETC Group, to take the floor to share with us on this topic of digital capitalism. She is a researcher and she works specifically on food sovereignty and peasant movements, and she is based in Argentina. After, we will be hearing from Jim Thomas, who is a director of research for ETC Group. And we will be hearing about the impacts of emerging technologies, including transgenic, synthetic biotechnology, and new digital technologies. Jim lives in the Laurentians, in the traditional territory of the Mohawk people in Quebec, Canada. We're going to start with Soledad now. Thanks very much, Soledad and Jim, for sharing your information with us today. Soledad, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Larissa. It's really a great pleasure to share this moment with a lot of colleagues and our friends from La Via Campesina. I will share a presentation start. Okay, so for the start of this seminar, we thought it would be good to give an overview of some of the issues that we need to take in account to understand the specificities of what digitalization means for peasant food systems. So I will start my presentation trying to bring together some ideas and concepts to help us figure out what exactly is going on with us. So this presentation is called Digitalization and Data Colonialism, the context of the latest capitalist assault on food systems. The idea is to find useful concepts to name and identify the phenomena that we are unveiling and ask ourselves, why has digitalization become an issue so rapidly for food movements? So I believe that the first question that we have to ask ourselves is about data. What is so big about data? Data is how we call any information that is produced, harvested, and stored by a computer. And big data platforms own the capacity to store these vast quantities of data in the cloud, in what we know as digital storage warehouses. In 2008, the world's most powerful corporations drilled oil wells and traded stocks. But now, 12 years later, the world's 5 corporate titans all deal in intangible data and have a market valuation that exceeds the GDP of entire continents. World's biggest data managers are well known: Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Facebook. Together, they store at least 1,200 petabytes of information. Also, major Chinese enterprises such as Alibaba and Tencent are harvesting enormous quantities of information. More like traditional commodities, data is made most valuable by processing it, particularly through artificial intelligence algorithms. Unlike physical commodities that increase in value through scarcity, data increases in value as more and more is hoarded and aggregated. The big question is not who is collecting the data, but more importantly, who is able to analyze the data to their advantage. I chose to talk about digital capitalism, but there are many authors and debates on the correct approach on the ongoing phenomena, and call it surveillance capitalism, data capitalism, informational platform, or others. But I didn't mean to enter this debate in this particular presentation. What I mean to focus now is to follow this idea that data is extracted in many forms, but it has massified since the popularization of the internet and what we call smart technologies. Smart technology is driven by the dual imperatives of digital capitalism. One that is extracting data from everything, and 2, expanding the control over everything and everybody. In a book called Too Smart, an author called Jatan Sadowski argues how data became a commodity and a form of capital. He looks at 3 domains: the smart self, the smart home, and the smart city. The smart self involves the self-tracking of steps walked and calories burned. It raises questions about what others do with our data and how they direct our behavior, whether or not we want them to. The smart home collects data about our habits that offers business a windows into our domestic spaces. Just as we have to implement an app in our phone to be able to use a refrigerator. And the smart city, where these systems have space to grow, offer military-grade surveillance capability to local authorities. We definitely add a 4th domain, not yet colonized, but in dispute, and that is smart agriculture. This is not out of the blue. We understand this as a digital way out of an economic crisis. In the 19th century, when profits from national markets began to dry up, industrial capitalism sought new markets, leading Western powers to intensify the violent conquest of other territories. That was the origin of imperialism. At the end of the 20th century, when the cycle of economic growth slowed down, capitalism reinvented itself through financialization, accompanied by cultural and political changes, such as new levels of consumerism that boosted credit and financial assets. Today, as financial speculation is failing to keep pace with the imperative of economic growth, capitalism is improving the efficiency of its systems of value extraction through digital platforms and markets. And this, of course, is definitely enhanced by the impacts of the pandemic on our everyday life. Data colonialism is what makes this possible. We know that historical colonialism violently appropriated territories and enslaved the bodies of others to extract value and set the conditions for the rise of industrial capitalism in the 18th century. In a book called The Costs of Connection, 2 scholars, Nick Coldry and Ulises Mejia, argue that to prepare the ground for this new phase of capitalism, a new form of colonialism is emerging. The resources being appropriated this time are us, human life in all its depth, collected as data. They call this data colonialism, an emerging order for the appropriation of human life so that data can be continuously extracted from it for profit. They affirm the appropriation of resources through data represent potentially as far-reaching land grab in digital territory as the conquest in historical colonialism that prepared the ground for industrial capitalism. As argued by Aníbal Quijano, the model, intensities, and context of colonialism changed in modernity, but the function remains exactly the same, is to dispossess. Just as historical colonialism, but with no need for the same kind of violence and mayhem the first colonialism did. That's because never before we've accepted so much with so little resistance. Just think of the terms of reference I might have signed up every time we install an app. Just to be in this Zoom, I may have to accept it probably around 10 terms of references, allowing corporations to access my data, my pictures, the information of my behavior, the people I talk to, what issues I talk to them about, and probably allowing them to know me better than I know them. The model, intensities, and context of colonialism changing We believe this deploys a chain reaction, which is the digital conversion of food system. It has many names depending on the institution that is talking about them, whether 4.0 agriculture, smart farming, precision agriculture, AgTech, Ag1, digital agriculture. These are all names given by companies and states to propose these packages of cutting-edge technologies. But they all share a vision, which is digital technologies mediate every aspect of food chains, providing the basic infrastructure for production, communication, and organizational practices within food production and distribution. And this is important not just because of the technology that is used. It's because the technology starts replacing others and social relations within the food chain. If we use a platform that fits with the data of my farm, and afterwards it gives me back a series of precision steps to enhance my production, and everyone in my territory uses exactly the same platform, and we start communicating through that platform. And this becomes the sort of social network where we exchange information within farm producers. What is the role of technical support the state is going to have? What is the role the movement is going to have to organize production in a different way? This particular digital technologies mediating communication and organizational practices reminds us that it's not just the implementation of a particular technology, but a whole system that organizes the food production and food social relations. Within the technologies that are being implemented, we may find those that are hardware, whether driverless agricultural machines, drones, satellites, GPS, animal chips, sensors, biomelzer for genomic editing, robots for packaging, among others. We also find softwares such as sensors that collect big data processed with artificial intelligence, where efforts are focused on genomic data stored in huge databases for use in genetic engineering endeavors, transgenic genomic editing, and synthetic biology, and climate data, yields of crops, market, and soils, among other types of data information that is being permanently processed. And we can also find what we call fintech, digital financial technologies that allow users to manage transactions or accountings. Blockchain-enabled food traceability systems reduce the financial cost of large corporations through the evasion of state regulation and legal transparency. Reminder, going smart for data. And these are some of the views that we might find in our fields. Not only an agricultural, looking at this field through the iPad that measures absolutely everything, but also technologies such as facial recognition of animals, GPS, monitoring, artificial intelligence, counting animals and their development, and also the automation of food work, the automation of crop picking, replacing human labor in any kind of work that food systems allow. And for the finishing of this presentation, the last point of this chain reaction is what ETC is calling the biodigital conversion of food systems, where agri-giants are combining their might with cash-rich data titans and investor-financed biotech firms This time, they are reorganizing about two further inputs that work together, data and DNA. And I think Jim can take it from here.
Sí, Jim, por favor.
Let me just unmute. Thank you very much, Soledad. That's a really helpful opening. And thank you very much to La Via Campesina and also Grain for helping us co-organize this event. So I'm going to take from where Soledad left off to ask the question who, and then start to answer the question why. Who is doing this digitization of the food chain that we're seeing, where from the consumer end, through onto the field, through onto the digitization even of seeds, everything is being turned into these data amenable commodities. And the answer is a lot of people. That if you start to map out who are the different players who are putting digitalization at the heart of their strategies for the food system, it's quite a wide range of players. And I'm going to just go through some of these different players very quickly to give you a sense of it. I was going to start with agribusiness. This is a picture from Neil Young's album, but it was fun. And many of the large agribusiness players that we're familiar with, the big four, BASF, Corteva, Bayer, and Syngenta ChemChina, are now reorganizing their strategies around data and around the digital approach. Probably the clearest example of this is Bayer, or was Monsanto and Bayer merged together. Back in 2013, Monsanto bought a small data company called the Climate Corporation that paid almost $1 billion. And at the time, it left many people scratching their heads why they were doing this. But the Climate Corporation had tremendous amounts of data on soil, climate, and combined with Monsanto's own breeding data, turned Monsanto into a data giant. And you can see there the quote from Rob Fraley of Monsanto at the time saying that he imagined Monsanto turning into an information technology company. That is in fact what Bayer has become. At the heart of Bayer Monsanto's digital approach is an app, what's called a digital platform. And you see that every one of the agribusiness firms has their own digital platform and is organizing around it. For Bayer, it is called FieldView, Climate FieldView. And this is a platform that a farmer can subscribe to pretty much almost for free, which gives them data about their field, but more importantly, takes data from their fields, from their tractors, from around them, and then sends it to the cloud, sends it to artificial intelligence processing in order to generate what are called prescriptions, to generate proposals on how the farmers should change their practice. The Monsanto Bayer say that there are about 40 key points in the year for farming where important decisions are made, and they wish to use artificial intelligence to direct the farmer how best to farm their specific place. This is in the idea of precision agriculture. Bayer Climate FieldView is about half of the digital agriculture at the market at the moment and covers 150 million acres in 23 countries and claims to have almost 70 billion data points. It has various apps like this Field Catcher app where a farmer can point his cell phone, his smartphone, at a weed or at a diseased plant, and the artificial intelligence agents up in the cloud will give back information about what is the disease you're looking at, what is the weed you're looking at. This is just one example. And as I mentioned, all of the large agribusiness companies have their own apps, their own digital platforms. Companies like Corteva has Granular and Encirca, John Deere has Operations Center, and so forth. What's going on here is really a land grab, trying to grab as much data as possible from farmers. And the question, of course, is who else do they use that data for? Ultimately, it's the companies themselves, the agribusiness firms who aggregate the data, and in the way that Soledad described, can then leverage that data in the marketplace. A very telling example was where it turned out that Bayer, Climate Field View, were sharing data with a company called Tillable, who are a sort of Airbnb for land. They sell and rent land. And they were appeared to be using data from Climate Field View to tell owners of land the proper prices that they should be charging farmers. And this created a huge backlash. They also use, in this case, Bayer, will use those prescriptions and data to create various kinds of market lock-ins. So when you sign up for Bayer Field View, you also, of course, get money off on all of Bayer's products, whether that's seeds or pesticides. But you can also increasingly sign up something called outcome-based pricing. So here you agree with Bayer that you will follow their prescriptions. And if you follow their prescriptions, they promise you will get a certain outcome. For example, a certain yield with a certain price. And if you reach that price, all good. If you don't reach that price, they promise to pay you the difference. And if you exceed that price at market, then they will split the difference with you. So in this way, it's becoming almost like the sort of contract farming. That, of course, it depends upon using Bayer's prescriptions from their artificial intelligence, and thereby, of course, using their products. But this isn't just for large farmers in the global north. Bayer is also trying to roll out digital platforms throughout the global south. MyAgro is a text-based system that's available in Africa, where you can text information about your farm, and you can get small amounts you can save up funds in order to buy fertilizers and so forth. And Climate Farmrise is another Bayer platform, in this case in India. And it's not just Bayer, and the seed and agrochemical companies, it's also the fertilizer companies. Nutrien has its own digital platform. Yara is very pushing hard on digital platforms. And of course, the machinery companies. In some ways, the machinery companies, such as John Deere, Case New Holland, AGCO, Mahindra, Kubota, these companies are perfectly placed for digital agriculture. For some while, they've been turning their tractors and so forth into GPS systems that collect data as it goes. But they're also making a lot of agreements and acquisitions of robotics companies. So here you see some of the examples of the big machinery companies who are buying robotics companies just in the last year or two. This is from some reports that we have coming out soon. And as you go up the chain, the grain traders, the likes of Cargill, Archer's Daniel Midland, Louis Dreyfus and Bunge have also reorganized their strategies around digitalization. In particular, they see the opportunity to streamline and control the movement of grains and of fresh produce and so forth through the international food chain. Incredibly, the 6 largest grain traders have created a single blockchain. A blockchain is a digital ledger system. But within that digital ledger system, this is the thing that runs cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin. But within that digital ledger system, they have what are called smart contracts. So that effectively there is automatic transactions going on where artificial intelligence agents are talking to each other, cutting out people out of the chain. And this blockchain, Covantus, which runs on the Ethereum blockchain, which produces Ether, a particular kind of cryptocurrency, is just becoming the main platform in which all of these grain companies are going to be trading. And that's just agribusiness. As we switch over to look at the large data companies, we find very quickly that they too are getting into the food market. The titans of of global capital at the moment. Google, Amazon, Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent are very cash heavy at the moment. They're responsible for about half the value of, for example, the New York Stock Exchange. And they're looking at the food system as a place to put all of that cash, to reorient the food system into being a source for massive amounts of data. Probably the clearest example of a data company moving heavily into the food system is Amazon. And of course, we know Amazon, many of us at the consumer end, that Amazon is a major delivery of grocery, particularly now through the pandemic, after they bought originally Whole Foods a few years ago and reinvented themselves as a grocery store in originally North America, but are now becoming a major force in groceries around the world, particularly in the last couple of years through the pandemic, where many people have started buying groceries in urban centers through these digital platforms. It's expected that within about 5 years, Amazon is going to be competing directly with Walmart to be the largest grocer in the world, not just digital grocer, the largest grocer in the world, and slugging it out also with Alibaba in China. But Amazon is digitizing every part of the food chain. Delivery, for example, they're really ahead on delivery by drone. Their warehouses, Amazon is one of the largest warehousing companies in the world, and its warehouses are run very much by robotics and data. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But perhaps most significantly, and not so clear to many people, is that it is Amazon, or its web services company, Amazon Web Services, that is actually holding and processing all the data that is coming off of so-called smart farming. Amazon Web Services actually accounts for about 63% of Amazon's profit. It's where most of their money comes from, and is working with Bayer, with John Deere and others to take the data that's coming off the fields in digital farming and to transform it through artificial intelligence. So Amazon is really the largest player, actually, in digital farming. That's not often very obvious. And just last year made digital farming a very big part of its future strategies. It's not just Amazon. Microsoft is the other major cloud player. Their Azure platform for clouds is also hosting agricultural and food data, but they have their own project, FarmBeats. And FarmBeats is an interesting project because they're attempting to bring digital tools not just to large farmers in the global north, but to small farmers, to find ways that small farmers throughout the world can be hooked on to digital platforms. And this matches, interestingly, the vision of Microsoft's founder, Bill Gates. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has decided that in the next 10 years, one of their key goals is to have half of all smallholder farmers in the global south, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and Latin America, have access to digitally enabled services. And FarmBeats is part of that. But I think just to round up who's bringing us digitization, it's important to dig slightly deeper and see who are the owners of these companies. And it's interesting that, in fact, when you look at who are the owners of Amazon, you see the largest owners are these asset management companies, Vanguard, BlackRock, State Street. And those, not surprisingly, are the largest owners of Corteva, of John Deere, of Bayer. The same companies have a very strong interest in ensuring that the agricultural and food businesses that they own are aligned with the interests of the tech and data companies. That at some level, it's this horizontal ownership that is driving this digitization of the food system. So I just wanted to end with some of the sort of things you'll hear about digital farming and why we need it, and why some of these big corporate players, how they're spinning the need for digitalization of the food system. One thing you'll hear again and again is that digitalization, particularly through use of ag robots and smarter data, means that there won't be a need for back-breaking, low-paid work anymore. That new technologies, this is an advert here from Microsoft, new technologies mean that the backbreaking work of farmers in the field is no longer necessary because we can automate that through digitization. What that obscures, of course, is who's really being automated. Particularly within the food chain, it's farm workers. And we'll hear later from Samir Doshi about the real impact on farm workers of mechanization. And as this comment from Greg Asbed of the Coalition of Democracy Workers says, mechanization is something that's been happening for farm workers for years. It's really not a small step. It's really just a small step, just treating workers as robots to actually replacing them with robots. And so we see headlines like this, promises that you can now run whole plantations without workers and getting rid of large amounts of workers. And increasingly, it won't be about getting rid of workers, but actually digitizing the worker themselves, turning them into something more robotic. And we've seen this really clearly in Amazon's warehouses, where just the use of large numbers of robots means that workers have to act in more mechanized ways. There's the higher injuries, and indeed, workers in Amazon warehouses now have to wear special devices to protect them from the robots and also to direct them to the right parts of the warehouse as if they were robots. The second narrative that you'll hear, is that digital agriculture really is about giving the farmer more knowledge. It's about giving them knowledge over their land, more data, and therefore better able to control and farm their land. And I think this is something that many on this call can discuss better than I can. At Cetra Group, we recently wrote a small...
Hola, Jean.
Yeah? Hello? Can you hear me?
No, just to remind, we are finishing the time to the other colleagues.
Great, I'll wrap up. And you know, really who gets the knowledge here is the data platform. So we can talk about that later. I just want to touch on two short things, and then I'll stop if that's all right, Larissa. One is that there is a claim that digital agriculture and digitization will impact climate change, that we can use less energy. And there's the idea that we're going to have data-driven farming in order to reduce the amount of, to allow more carbon to be sequestered. What I would just point out here is that data is energy. It is, in fact, electrons. And that, in fact, the amount of energy required to run data systems is huge. By 2025, we're looking at a fifth of all global electricity running data systems. And we can run the numbers on digital farming, and it's huge. I won't do it right now, it's the end of time. Of course, there's also the use of resources as well. And finally, there's this idea that digitalization will keep food chains running. And just to say quickly, last week we saw Facebook go down around the world just for 6 hours. Thankfully, Facebook wasn't running our food system, but if it was, then we may have a real problem. I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Hola, Jean. Soledad, muchas gracias por su presentación. Discúlpame.
Hi, Jim. This is Soledad speaking. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sorry, I just need to be sure that everybody gets their allocated time. But it is shocking what the ETC group has just shared with us, how these companies that are best positioned to capture data, process data and negotiate them, how they can take us towards this monopolization of food systems. So that's something that we have to keep in mind when we look at food sovereignty. So now we're going to go to our next presentation, and we're going to learn specifically about the consequences on food sovereignty and how peasants are dealing with this new digital era. So I would like to call now on Devlin Kuyek. I'm not sure if it's Devlin or Cartini who's going to be doing this, but I'll present both of them. So Devlin is one of the most active grain researchers. They focus on monitoring the overall aspects of these major corporations and especially how they take over land. Devlin is based in Montreal. And then Cartini Salmon joined grain in 2013. For several years, Cartini worked in Asia, Southeast Asia specifically, in different food sovereignty struggles. Cartini has experience in different movements in different countries, and is now implementing the grain project in that region in Asia. So thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to give the floor now to our people from grain. Thanks, Larissa. I think I'll go first.
For such a wonderful overview of the issue. In this section, we're just going to dive a little deeper into some of the impacts on food sovereignty and some of the actors in the food system. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes going into where Jim left off there a little bit about what this means for small food producers. As Soledad and Jim were saying, so much of what these digital platforms depend on is this mass sort of harvesting of data and converting it with algorithms. But you know, it's important to note that most small farmers in the world are not connected through the internet. So there's a huge bias in the system. And of course, a lot of the technologies that they were showing there, you know, very few are developed for small farms. Certainly not for diverse farming. And there's a huge dependence of these platforms on the existing data that's out there. So the data that has been collected by extension services over the years on you know, soil testing and field testing and yield measurements, and that just doesn't exist for most small farms in the world. The extension services, where they are, they've been largely gutted. And there's nothing that any of these digital companies are looking at doing that would fill that gap. So if anything, a lot of these companies see this as a way to pull back on some of their actual visiting to the fields and their interactions or live interactions with farmers. So, you know, from what we've seen out there, what's the data when it comes to most small farmers that these companies are gathering is going to be very poor quality data. And from that poor quality data, of course, you're going to get very poor quality advice that they're going to be providing to farmers. And that's where you see some of these digital platforms that have been created in the global south. Often they're partnering with input suppliers. So their real logic here is just to try to become a way to connect with farmers and allow these input companies to be able to encourage the farmers to buy their products. So it really will provide very little in the way of knowledge or useful information to farmers, and that's particularly the case if you're a farmer interested in or doing work with agroecology, and diverse farming systems and local seeds. And these platforms will offer you really nothing. But that's not what they're so much about, I think, when it comes to their objectives with small farmers. What we see more is companies sort of looking for ways to integrate small food producers who are not yet integrated into the corporate systems, who aren't buying chemical fertilizers and corporate seeds, who aren't maybe selling to the Cargills of the world or the Unilevers and Nestle's, and use these digital platforms as a way to integrate them into these corporate systems. And the main sort of mechanism for that is what Soledad was mentioning about fintech, or you could call it digital banking or digital money. And already several countries were seeing these sort of digital banking systems that operate through cell phones. So, say a small farmer who doesn't have a bank account and has had no ability to access credit, suddenly through a cell phone can get access to small loans provided by the telecom company. So in Kenya, for instance, there's a company called Safaricom, which is a subsidiary of Vodafone, and they function through a national digital money system called M-Pesa, and they have created a platform called DigiFarm, in which they will provide through a cell phone credit to a farmer. Now, that small farmer who receives that credit will also be connected to the input suppliers. So as part of the loan package, you will be purchasing, say, seeds from Syngenta or fertilizers from Miara. And then you'll be connected to a chatbot service, so an advisory service that's probably partnered with an input supplier. And they will advise the farmer on what inputs to use and how to use them. The farmer may be required to get crop insurance. Of course, there will be a quite high interest loan to pay back. And then, taking that even further, the harvest may already be sold off to one of the downstream food companies that are part of this platform. So you really get this essentially a digital model of corporate farming, which happens can happen at a much larger scale and reduces the cost tremendously for corporations to reach farmers. They don't have to go out into the field; they can do it all through these digital platforms. But of course, it completely dismisses and leaves out all farmer knowledge, farmer seeds, local animal breeds. It's all about integrating it into these uniform corporate systems. So it's really a narrowing of the knowledge base and an integration into what we call sort of contract farming. And I think Kartini is going to talk about the downstream side of that. So I'll pass it over to her.
Thank you, Devlin. Thank you, everyone. It's really a pleasure to join these discussions with Vietnamese and ETC friends. So I have a presentation that I'd like to share. 1 second. So yes, thanks. I will focusing more on this particular aspects of digitalizations and its connections with agricultures and food systems, which is becoming more and more familiar with many of us. Either you live in rural areas, either you live in urban areas, which is e-commerce. And it is one of the most fast-growing aspect of digital agriculture. Actually, if you see the role of several of the companies who involve in this e-commerce. So e-commerce is very much increased in the last 5-6 years in what's already a very concentrated food retail sector. Right now, overall, like 50% of the global food sales are already being sold through supermarkets, hypermarkets, and all those big chains. But e-commerce are actually eyeing in a bigger portions of that share, of that market shares. And so they become very concentrated in the last 2-3 years. And if you see some of the examples of the biggest e-commerce company who are existing right now are Alibaba and JD.com, two of the biggest Chinese e-commerce company, are now top 2 of the top 100 retail companies in the world, even in the world. And in Asia Pacific, they really dominated the market. Why? Because they're not only owning the distribution channel, but they're also making sure that their supply are secured for the consumers, and they're actively buying up or setting up their own farm or setting up indoor farm or digital farm in many places around Asia in particular. For example, Alibaba are buying up 29 dairy farm in New Zealand just to secure that they have enough dairy supply to for their consumers that they can send every day. And these are becoming very integrated over the years. Even though you have like hundreds of new startups coming up, top 5 of it is still some of the biggest companies: Alibaba, JD.com, Amazon, Walmart, and also the Japanese network, Rakuten, are among the biggest players in e-commerce these days. And so the pandemic is really showing us how they are a powerful industry, because when there is such a panic, at the beginning of the pandemic last year, and people tried buying up and supply their pantries, their kitchen with enough food, they're turning into online shopping. They're turning into, relying on this e-com companies. So when many industries are failing and many, the e-commerce become is really a giant industry, and securing and even creating new billionaires. Some groups, market analysis, calling them the biggest winner of this pandemic, actually. Just to give some examples, Amazon's founder, actually, Jeff Bezos, increased almost 100 billion only in 1 year, his personal wealth, due to increase of online groceries retail in particular. And then JD.com had a 374% transactions volume increase in January compared to the same period last year, solely from the groceries. And one of the biggest growth is the fresh food sales that e-commerce in China. Before 2018, they only account for less than 5% of the total fresh food sales, but in early 2020, fresh food sales that being sold through the e-commerce platform goes from 50 to 100%. So this is not a small market that they are controlling the whole, within the food system, within the whole food web. They're taking a bigger slice of it. And online retail is actually speeding up the process of privatizing food market. And one of the most clear examples, I think the colleague from India will talk more about, is the privatizations of market that happened in India, and that's being supported by the passing of the 3 farm bills. Jim was mentioning that in his presentations, that luckily Facebook is not yet, it's not controlling our food sales, but Facebook is already eyeing on it. And they are investing almost $6 billion in one of India's biggest retail, Reliance, and coming into that competitions with Amazon and Walmart. because Amazon and Walmart together, now they control 2/3 of the whole global, all of the total India's digital retail. So that's a big market that they already, only 2 companies are owning, and Facebook won a slice of that. So they're jumping in and they're investing in Reliance, one of India's biggest retail companies. And I mean, this competition shows, you know, how just a few groups of big corporations are really fighting against each other. And now Walmart wants to buy another big giant retail in India called Tata Group. So they're really capturing different, you know, a broad spectrum of the food market that's happening in many places. And another example is just to show that in Indonesia, where I base, is World Bank and Microsoft are actively partner and support one of the online fresh food sales called Tani Hub to accelerate. Just interesting, I found it because World Bank call it as sustainable supply chain in agriculture, and present this online fresh food sales, Tani Hub, as a solutions to disrupt a conventional agriculture supply chain. But that means, you know, in countries like Indonesia, where after agriculture, the second largest source of livelihood is those who are relying on selling and distributing food. Really very much when World Bank and Microsoft, you know, really invest so much in only one companies, online fresh companies, that will eliminate source of livelihood for like 12.5 million stall owners operating in over 13,000 fresh market registered in the country. And that's the only the registered one, because inside this fresh market, there are informal workers earning income from these food markets that, you know, operating day to day, from the courier, from the cleaner, from everyone who are part of that fresh market. Actually, the number is huge. And, you know, the fact that World Bank and Microsoft said that it is more sustainable, that's a question mark for many people also, because one, they are creating what it's called, like what Devlin was mentioning, a contract farming, because World Bank said they will provide help, you know, financial support for those who are partnering with Tani Hub to supply for their produce to sell. So you see how this online fresh food sales are now becoming the only intermediaries, actually, because they said that it's you know, it's the conventional agri supply chain is unsustainable, but the fact that the conventional agri supply chain also sustain the livelihood of millions of people in the country. So that's something that is really important to highlight also, the fact that the intertwining of groceries and online company is also become a test bed for many of the new technologies, such as blockchain, for example, and often it's being promoted as a way to for consumers to find out whether your food or your the product you buy in the supermarket are produced in a sustainable manner or not. But blockchain means it has to go in one you know, value chain. It's like it has to be integrated, meaning from the food that's being produced on farm to packaging and distribution. It has to be in one, as Jim was mentioning, is one ledger system, you know? So if you're not part of that system, you cannot be traced down. And so the whole idea of creating blockchain is really to integrate all these different, you know, different food web into one that can be controlled and managed, but they never question the sustainability when it's being sold in, you know, faraway countries. Because the advertising, one of the most interesting advertising that I saw is like, it's a pineapple, and it says that, oh, now you can trace the pineapple that you buy, whether it's being produced sustainably in Brazil or not, you know. But the fact that it's being transported from Brazil to Indonesia is never been questioned. And the other is the promotions or the introductions of unmanned stores. Unmanned stores are also ways to gather consumers' data and shaping consumers' behavior through the use of, you know, nudging, preference. Or when you buy online, they tend to suggest, they made, you know, companies made suggestions, and it's always there because of the algorithm. Some of the product always appear on top, and it actually, affect your consumers' behavior, and farmers who try to sell their product, if they cannot pay enough percentage or to be advertised on top, their product will not show on the top list of the product that consumers will buy. So it provides advertisements for food industries and limiting actually consumers' choices to what you want to eat, what you can eat. You know, it's really shaping your food preference. And the fact that e-commerce combined, many of them are working with big ag and food industry, is very much shaping the food choice and eating behavior. And it's not just predict consumers' behavior, but influence and modify it, and can modify it using targeted advertisement. You will see, for example, if you use your phone or Facebook, and then you start seeing, advertising of product that you don't know you need, you know, or you don't want to buy, but it just keep popping up in your screen. And the online offline merger, as I mentioned earlier, how some of this e-commerce are actually, one, they have their own farm. Second, they also realize that they need physical stores, and that's why they're jumping in and buying up the fact that, you know, Amazon is buying Whole Food. And then Alibaba also invests billions of dollars to set up their own stores, physical stores, is showing that they need more presence. You know, this is not just through your computers or your phone, but they're really setting up physical stores and replacing many of the corner stores or small kiosks in many places. And so this could much affect the life and that for millions of local neighborhood stores, street vendors, that really an important source of people's economy. On the same time, you know, the COVID pandemic also, some of the COVID measures is all increased crackdown for traditional market and street vendors in many places. They are biased regulations that made, you know, force traditional market to close down, while supermarkets or online delivery can go around freely. And that's actually the challenge that we are seeing today, where there's not enough workforce that can be absorbed, also one. And the fact that, as I mentioned before, it's really creating and influencing the food choices that we consume, that people consume. And the fact that this traditional market holds very strong culture and traditions over many years and livelihood of thousands of peoples in places like in Asia, it's something that is very visible. You know, it's still there's still a lot of fresh market and street vendors available. But also the fact that, you know, during this pandemic, we see how small farmers and traders try to find alternative ways to market their product, you know. And I'm not saying that small farmers and traders cannot benefit from the technology, but I think we need to figure out and to think ways of breaking of this big tech or big corporations, and to really fight for a space in this growing, you know, digital world, because there are examples where farmers and traders are coming together and setting up their own independent online market and distributions. I think we will hear more from the examples from the ground. I'm just saying that I think the fact that now these big tech e-commerce are becoming too big, you know, they're capturing up so much space in the food distributions is really something that we need to challenge. So thank you very much for that, and I'll give it back to Larissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kartini. Thank you so much, Devlin. Yeah, discúlpame. Voy a hablar en español para facilitar las cosas. Muchas gracias por las
I'll speak in Spanish. Thanks for your presentations. Actually, it is unbelievable how much power the supermarkets have. A good example of what you were commenting on was the modern platform of agriculture that was launched by Syngenta. I think it is not necessarily a seed or pesticide company. It is a digital service, agricultural digital service company. And they carry out the first activity as seed producer and it's in exchange of operations. So they're selling the seeds and fertilizers, and then they buy themselves the yield, the crops. And I've seen the operations they carry out in Brazil, and they send it to China. So their products, getting larger prices because of digital traceability, because of that certification due to the blockchain use. Not because of agroecology or because it was used by others, but because of the traceability. That's a new sort of certification. Two companies work with that, only two of them. So fintechs, all these big agricultural giants can create this monopolization of the resources from seed production to consumption, or what we call farm to fork, which is basically apparently impacting climate, where we see the uniformization of the uses of algorithm, and that could create this also replace work, knowledge in. When we talk about how this digitalization is impacting cities, how will that impacting agroecology, food production, sovereignty in the territories, and how movements are resistant. I will now give a call to 6 colleagues in this second part so that we can share their experiences on resistance, and whether it is possible to use technology in favor of farmers and food sovereignty to face this corporate power. I will now give the floor and invite Samir, who is a researcher of Stanford University, California. He has more than 20 years experience working together with communities on climate justice and food sovereignty. Samir Doshe, I'll give you the floor. And the question we ask to all of you is how digital agriculture is impacting rural workers in the US. Thank you, Samir. I will give you the floor now.
Thank you so much. It's just a pleasure to be speaking here. Thank you to Grain and etc. Group for hosting. And it's just been really interesting hearing a lot of the different pieces and overviews. I'm going to specifically focus on the context in the US. And I think just the recognition of the different inequities and power dynamics with labor on farms. And then there's very similar inequities and power imbalances on labor in food processing, in factories, in retail, and kind of all through the food value chain. But on farms, just providing like the context, farm workers represent 73% of all farm labor. There's 2.5 million farm workers in the US. The majority of these are immigrants that are coming from Mexico. Also recognizing that the majority of workers in food processing and factories are also people of color. But at the same time, 98%, so everything but 2% of all farms are owned by white farmers and growers. There's an immense imbalance in terms of the power, the direction, the management of these operations. So the reality for workers on the farm is that they faced a host of issues, from a lack of healthcare services to incredibly long hours here on the west coast of the continent, as we're facing immense impacts from climate. We have wildfires, we have low-level smog. So workers are working in conditions of atmospheric pollution, of extreme heat, which also causes them, it forces them by the owners to harvest at much earlier hours of the day. So in order to ensure that there's kind of peak ripeness to get to markets, to get to shipping, you'll see workers now harvesting at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., bringing their children on because of the lack of childcare services. And as we talked about with the recognition that the majority of workers are immigrants, we have a terrible lack of immigration protections, a terrible lack of labor protections specifically for farm workers, unlike other industries. And it's just overall the recognition that there is an incredible amount of racism in the food and farm industry, and how it others people of color, Black workers, brown workers, Native and Indigenous workers, and just oppressions of these other cultures. Just an interesting example of how we can think about technology putting a play in. Also I'll just step back and say that in the rural aspects, in rural regions of the US, there is also a lack of digital access and of broadband and internet access. So there's an enormous push for digital inclusion, but this has lent itself to this concept of digital redlining, where the control of data and flow and rate is determined by telecom companies. So I know we focused a lot on data use companies from Google and Amazon and Microsoft, but none of them have access if the telecom operators aren't providing the flow of data. And because of this incredible power and scale that telecom companies operate, they provide chokeholds and preferences for more affluent communities versus lower income communities. So what we're actually seeing in terms of the lack of data protections, the lack of digital protections in the US, unlike in the EU and other countries where we have seen better data regulatory policies, is that it becomes an incredibly extractive culture, as Jim and others have already stated. In terms of where we can see successes, there's some interesting experiments I've seen that people have put in the chat. These are like very small scale works, but what we've seen in other sectors and industries, from healthcare to education to areas that are also heavily digitized, is that victories have happened where we've seen a strong level of organizing, just in terms of basic, justice and sovereignty issues. And then how digital activism and equity can sit on top of those areas. So, for example, Jim talked about the coalition of Immokalee workers and the organizing that they did specifically with buyers. And in order to ensure better protections for workers and using indigenous principles and practices. And it's a fantastic example of that level of organizing that you can then starting to look at, well, what does data sovereignty look like in those sorts of negotiations? What does the inclusion of digital technologies for artificial intelligence harvesting or other things that actually don't need a data pipeline, but how do those types of technological innovations benefit workers and center workers? How can the designs come actually from workers, and that any improvements don't just go to profiteering, but it actually goes towards workers themselves? The last point that I'll make, just an illustration of what changes can be made. In terms of payment, again, farm workers have incredibly low rates of compensation, but if we increased it to a living wage towards what $20 an hour would be for workers, it would, and let's say that that become a regulatory policy in terms of a minimum wage, and that the owners charge that directly to consumers. I'm just finishing up this last point. So the impact of a $20 an hour rate for workers would cost households just $25 per year extra across each household. And it just illustrates the access and ease of what significant changes could be if we started organizing along those lines of principles. So thanks so much.
Desculpa-me, Samir, tengo que ser un poco más.
Sorry, Samir, I have to be strict with time so that everyone has time to speak. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences and for bringing up this very important aspect of structural and systemic racism and how digitalization drives and deepens these problems. Now, I would like to call upon Nachiket Udupa, who is joining us from MKSS, which is the Association for the Empowerment of Laborers and Farmers in India. So Nachiket has shared with us that digitalization is advancing in India very quickly. And he's going to be sharing with us how the advance of corporate digital agriculture in India is connected to farmers' protests. Thank you, Nachiket. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here today. Like you said, the farmer protests in India have now been going on for over 10 months, and hundreds of thousands of farmers have been protesting. And to see the link with digitization, one has to also briefly first understand what the farmers are protesting against. And essentially, there are three laws. The first law is to bypass regulated markets. So agriculture is presently a state subject, and markets are regulated, agricultural markets are regulated by states. And the first law is a central law that allows bypassing of these regulated markets. The second law is a contract farming law, so that corporations can directly enter contracts with farmers. Essentially, like the earlier speakers were saying, all these big companies now want to have assured supply, and so they want to enter into contracts with farmers. And the third law is the one that removes stockholding limits, so that those who are into trading can hold unlimited stocks, and in that sense, then they can control the market and control prices. So this is what the farmers are protesting against. Fundamentally, they are opposing the removing of regulation to protect farmers' interests against corporate interests. And it is in this context that one has to see developments of digitization in agriculture in India. And also one needs to see that digitization of governance in general across sectors has been taking place in India since around 2010. There's a project called the Unique ID project, or the UID, which goes under the brand name Aadhaar in India. And through that, all these, the digitization in agriculture, similarly digitization taking place in health, in education, all these are offshoots of the push that began 10 years ago. And specifically now on digitization of agriculture in India, the central government of India has entered into MOUs with 10 companies. And just to give an idea of what these MOUs are or who they are with, one is with Microsoft. Many people were talking about Microsoft earlier already, and it's about using their Azure technology, like Jim said. Another is with Amazon, which has also now begun selling agri inputs in India, and the agreement is with the Amazon Web Services, AWS, that Jim was talking about. Another is with a Walmart-backed company called Ninja Cart. One more is with a company called Jio, which belongs to Reliance, that Kartini was talking about, promoted by the richest man in India, Ambani. And it has investments from Facebook. It's working with Google to develop a phone. So these are the kind of people that the government of India has entered into agreements with. And in these agreements, farmers' data of entire districts has been given to these corporations to develop proofs of concepts, without any data protection law in place. And so it's essentially this, that nobody knows exactly what they want. They're just being given people's data to do what they can, and then show something hopefully at the end of it. And all this is happening. The policies have been developed by a committee where there's no farmer representative. There are no grievance redressal mechanisms in place, no accountability measures in place to protect farmers' interests. So essentially, it's about enabling online marketplaces to bypass the existing physical regulated marketplaces. And it's in this sense that, it's a furthering of what the farmers are protesting against, expanding the marketplace for inputs, credit, and post-harvest produce, like what Devlin was talking about. So I'll just quickly conclude on, a possible way forward. Activists like us are not against digitization per se, but it's the way that it is being undertaken. So I think the fundamental principle has to be that farmers, in the specific context of agriculture, or people in general across sectors, should be able to control their data and how it is used. And I think globally, the challenge is to come up with laws, regulation, and technologies that can enable this paradigm. So thank you very much for having me here. I'll be happy to respond to questions on chat or otherwise. And in the chat, I'll also just put a link with resources on digitization in India in case people are interested. Thanks a lot.
Gracias, Nashket. Es muy impresionante la rapidez con que están direccionando.
Thank you, Nashket. It's incredible the speed at which the money is being sent out, how the government is supporting multinational corporations. This is something that has been seen in Latin America, and things are worsening rapidly. But we're also seeing the amazing ability of people to protest against this throughout the world. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. Now, we want to talk a little bit about alternatives and how we can use different tools for supporting small farmers. So now we're going to call upon Humberto Palmeira, who is going to be explaining to us how the MPA, the Small Farmers Movement, has used digital platforms to build peasant info baskets and the popular food system, supply system in Brazil. So thank you, Humberto. You have the floor. Hello, Larissa. Hello to all my brothers and sisters. I'm going to be speaking what's known as Portuñol, a bit of a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. I'll try my best to speak in Spanish so that those can understand me. I'm going to share my presentation now.
¿Apareció?
Can you see my presentation? Yes.
Bueno, entonces, más una vez, muchas gracias en nombre del...
So, on behalf of the MPA, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be able to speak with you today. This week, La Via Campesina has been fighting for food sovereignty in Brazil and partaking in this fight against hunger. So the info basket, this has been a bit of an experiment that we started in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, in the second largest department, which is the equivalent of a province in Brazil. So in a couple of different areas. We started in 2015. So we carried out this experiment to contribute so that peasants would have a better livelihood.
Então, assim, pensamos a ser uma espécie de venda antecipada de los produtos para
so we sold products to help with this whole marketing process.
Quando chegou o ano passado, 2020.
So from 2015 to 2020, we were doing this, but then with the pandemic, we had to make some changes.
Most
of the city was in lockdown, and so markets also closed. We had been selling at markets, so we had to make some changes to make sure that we would be able to continue selling. So we set up a platform for the farmers basket. So we gave people the opportunity to still be able to purchase their baskets on this page that you can see here. And we had about 200 people who signed up. So basically it was like a kind of market. People came onto the page and could choose their basket and put the food that they wanted in it. We used this platform here to be able to answer people's questions. So we have a WhatsApp group as well that we used. And that helped us to interact with people. So the food that we are selling comes from 13 different departments or states in Brazil. And this means that there were 40,000 people that were involved. So this required a lot of logistical work. And selling was done in medium and large cities. So with the pandemic, we set up a partnership and set up in different neighborhoods. And our partnerships allowed us to improve logistics and make it to, out to different neighborhoods in each city. So we had approximately 1,600 people in all of these different neighborhoods in Rio. So this, during the pandemic, this allowed us to collect peasants' produce and sell it in the city. So at the start of the pandemic, we were selling approximately 5 baskets per month, and this went up to over 1,000 baskets within a few months during the pandemic. And so this was enormous growth, of course. So these are peasants that really depended on markets. And when markets were closed, well, they needed a new way to be able to sell their products. So that's what we helped them with. Here's a photo of us before the pandemic. So you can see people here without masks on. And this provided a place for people to be able to go and get fresh and healthy food. So there's all kinds of work that needed to be done to set this up in neighborhoods, of course. And here we have March 2020 to May 2021, some data here. So almost 500,000 tons of food that we were able to sell. So from our perspective, some of the observations that we can take from all of this is that it was almost impossible to think about selling, to be able to sell anything without using digital means. But this, of course, also comes with challenges. So the first challenge was how to control our information. So we had this challenge of how to maintain an IT system that would allow us to control our data. So others today have mentioned that, you know, this data is worth a lot of money. And so we need to think about cyber sovereignty. Internet connection isn't great in Brazil. And people, of course, use their cell phones to communicate, though. I'm just finishing up now, Larissa.
Hacer sus propias vendas. Pero que nos preocupan acá.
But we're concerned specifically in Brazil that the huge digital networks are actually growing. Our networks like Mercado Libre, if you want to get a seat, you need to get iFood is also creating in Brazil such a dependency, and it's a call to all of you to go through a research on that. iFood is integrating local producers or urban consumption, integrating the whole chain. So we are afraid that we have not kept the pace on how to face those corporations and how to avoid that negative impacts of digitalization. Thank you very much, and apologies for the time I took. Thank you, Beto. I think it's quite interesting to get to know more of what you're doing and your experiences in Africa and in Asia. Cyber sovereignty is probably an issue that we may raise. I will now call Ange David from RAIN. He is based in Costa Rica, in Cote d'Ivoire, in Senegal. And he will be sharing with us, like Beto, how digital platforms sometimes get forces with big supermarkets and they're replacing intermediaries and they're becoming the big organizers of the whole food supply chain. And how do you relate digital agriculture with the struggle of protecting local market against corporate supermarkets in Senegal?
Merci à tout le monde. Je vais m'exprimer. Thank you, everyone. I'm going to express myself in French. Thanks, Larissa. Thanks for this opportunity. I believe that Jim said something that's very important when he talked about the exclusion of farm workers. With this digitalization, we see a lot of exclusion. And what we have noticed also, and we did solidarity work for several years now with activists in Senegal. Senegal, as you know, is located in Western Africa, and we have seen a cooptation or the emergence of a lot of digital applications that are used to control the distribution of food. And this distribution of food, when you have Jumbia, for example, which is a company that is linked to stores like Carrefour and Auchan, which are supermarkets, facilitate the control and purchase of food. And in the pandemic, here in Africa, this trend was strengthened. And we see that people, because of the pandemic, the local markets, when you go to the local markets in many countries of Western Africa, when we had lockdown, it was prohibited to go to the markets. And it was an opportunity so that these types of applications and controls, which are digital, could be used. And one of the things that were important also, we talked about how the small farmers and the small retailers, the street vendors, how important they are in the food chain and in the solidarity and food solidarity and food sovereignty. So we worked with a group that organized itself to resist this market that was being developed by a French multinational, which has lots of supermarkets, which is called Auchan. And these big supermarkets have established themselves in several countries, such as Kenya and the Ivory Coast, to control the distribution of food. And what is also important, and that has to be underlined, is that this strategy caused a certain uniformization in a system in which a food sovereignty, where, for example, in Nigeria, a lot of people that live in that country consume a lot of yuca, based on yuca. And in Ivory Coast, we also use this plant, this root crop, but in a different way. So we have a diversity of local products that have been destroyed partially and where there's a resistance against the supermarkets. And what we have noticed is that there is a change in the food habits of a lot of Africans, because in this new system that is emerging, there is a connection with KFC and Burger King and other companies like that. They consume food there, and they propose a food habits that are different in the population. So the resistance that we have to support food sovereignty, for example, the gari, the cassava that we consume in Benin, and this local production is part of resistance and part of, and as we see, these multinationals are invading, penetrating more and more in the market, and generating more profits in Africa in the food sector. And if we don't support this resistance that we have seen in Senegal against the supermarkets, the Auchan supermarkets, we will see that the local food systems and the local markets will be destroyed by this invasion of the digitalization of agriculture. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ange. How important it is to keep seed control and food production at the local level are probably real solutions to avoid that corporate control that is impacting food sovereignty all over. I will now invite Nicolas, who is member of the Atelier Paysan. He is also a producer of the manifesto Recovering Human from Machineries, and he works in France. Nicolas?
Yes.
Okay.
Please.
I'm sorry, it's a new second-hand computer, so camera, I don't manage to have this camera running. So please focus on my voice and close your eyes. So I'm from L'Atelier Paysan. L'Atelier Paysan at the beginning is a small organization that started to make machines, build machines for agroecological ways of production. A peasant met another one, and they decided that there was not on the market the machines for what they wanted to do, how they wanted to do on their farms. So they started to build machines, their own machines. For sure, it was low-tech machines. After years of this alternative running really fine, it's productive and efficient, we discovered that our alternative is not changing things. We are a necessary, an essential alternative, but it's still not enough to change things. So we started working to identify the locks, the systemic locks that's blocking our alternatives from becoming the majority. So it was an intense work about the machine, and we discovered that nobody ever thought about the agro machines as a political object. So our research was on this topic. Currently, in the world, the agro machine industry is bigger in dollars than seeds, chemicals, fertilizers, total. So we could discover a kind of logic in history with technology, doing that after with the first machines and now the 4.0, the connected machines, the big way in history, removing human work for sure, but also all the all the productivity gains made by on the farms were absorbed by the upstream industry, so machine, fertilizer, chemicals, and by the downstream industry, so transformation of products and the shops and the supermarkets. So we are seeing this new wave of connected machines in agriculture as a kind of continuity, as a radicalization of the historical tendency. So we are opposing to this kind of machines our what we call the peasants technology peasant, which is clearly an oxymoron, peasants technology. But we are not obsessed in doing things low tech. Our thing is to do it with 5 criteria. So having the investment of users, that's people who are doing it. That's people who are doing it that have to create the machines, doing it from the needs of peasants. We are not a design office. We have to, it's peasants creating the machine. They must be reproducible on the farm. So with the basic tools, the welding machine, cutting machines, and but everything that you can have in a small workshop. We have to think and do together. And then we are giving these plans and machines in Creative Commons for everybody to use and to build. So we still, the point is to have peasants working together, creating this machine from their needs. So even ethical, free, open source robot or drone, we don't want. We don't want free drone, open drone or nothing. We want to keep peasants to get the control on the technology. And as soon as you go into electronics and digital, you are losing this. You get, it's incredibly long and worldwide value chains for any electronic components. The complexity is way too big for anybody to, any peasants to, maybe you can have an impression, a feeling of mastery in front of a monitor, but you're just a slave of a big industry. So for us, our machines, we are not using, and we are strictly opposing to this new wave of connected 4.0 machines. And if I got 1 minute more, I give it to someone.
One more minute.
Okay, so 1 minute. So we are not speaking anymore about technological sovereignty. I know sovereignty is a word from Via Campesina, but we are talking now about autonomy. We are talking about autonomy. So autonomy is not sovereignty, meaning there is a sovereign. Autonomy is meaning you make the inventory of your dependencies, and then you can choose which dependencies you want to avoid, which dependency you want to cut, and which dependencies are making you more free and you want to reinforce these dependencies. And that's why we stopped talking about sovereignty to use autonomy now. Thank you.
Gracias, Nicolás. Es muy interesante.
Thank you, Nicola. I think that interesting approach on and that will present and preserve the peasant reality, and not just simply the using of technologies of that free software just mentioned. It is important to understand what we select. We are going only against the corporate power, but how to look at public policies on a different framework, which is not the corporate system. So it is important to highlight the fact that they have these alternatives in the market. We will now give the floor to Perla Alvarez. She's an indigenous leader from Conamuri, Paraguay. She's also part of COAP Via Campesina in Latin America. And she's part of the National Peasant and Indigenous Women Organization. How is this struggle around digitalization connected to the struggles of land control, over control of territories and knowledge?
Buenos días. ¿Me escuchan?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Yes, Perla.
Nuestra forma de
So I just said hello to everyone in Guarani. It's just a way of saying, you know, how are you? And to just express our the fact that we're concerned about everyone around us. So hello to everyone. I was in all these different parts of the world, and I know we're all on different time schedules as well. But the topic that we're talking about today is something that we've been talking about a lot in at Conamuri, the group that I'm involved in. This is a topic that we're concerned about, and we've been talking about the digitalization of agriculture when we don't even have our guaranteed right to internet access. So we have this very limited access to the internet and the communications that you can obtain through this. So often we don't have any internet coverage, and when it is available, it's usually very expensive and it's usually a very weak signal, and so it's not stable. However, I've been listening to what people have been saying so far. I wasn't able to catch all of them, but I wanted to say that here we've been talking about technological development and scientific progress. When it benefits most people, when it benefits most of humanity, it's very welcome. But when it creates doubts about what kind of benefits humanity will be able to reap from it, that is when we have to look more carefully at it. So with this issue of agricultural digitalization, there is this alarm bell that's really going off for us. And then we have to look at how this ties in with our struggle. We are fighting for food sovereignty. We're fighting to ensure our collective rights to food in our communities, the towns that we live in our general, the people around us in general. Indigenous agriculture, small-scale agriculture, this is what actually feeds the world. It's what feeds our cities. So we are concerned about the rest of humanity as well when we are concerned about food sovereignty and about ourselves. Multinational corporations are behind all of this digitalization so that they can develop agriculture without farmers, without peasants, without people. Basically, it is machines that work instead, but those machines need to be monitored by workers. It's impossible to imagine in economic terms and in terms of humanity, it's impossible to imagine any of these changes without workers. We know how to produce food, we the peasants. And we have had to develop our own technology in order to be able to do this. We've had to develop things in order to respond to various crises, to deal with hunger around the world. We use ancient knowledge, we adapt. We've been adapting to climate change because, of course, we have to. We definitely can't possibly deny climate change like some do, because we have seen this massive impact that it has had on our rural areas, on production. And everything that multinationals have done, what they have imposed on our land, that is what is destroying the earth and leading to climate change. We have incorporated technologies that we ourselves have developed in our collective spaces through La Via Campesina, in different experiments that that organization has carried out, as well as in other forums. Our struggle is about resisting any kind of technology that attempts to pull humans away from nature and break that link between us. We are resisting every time the data that is generated based on our knowledge is going to then go and be sold and make profits for these multinationals. We don't want our own knowledge to end up being subject to economic speculation. So we need to understand how this whole, these issues of digitalization work. We need to understand data being stored in the cloud. We need to understand all of these issues and look at how multinationals are taking control of our food systems. Yes, I've seen the 1 minute warning. So what are new global policies going to be to deal with world hunger, for example? Our work on a daily basis on the ground is about this resistance that men and women working in the fields, we are doing every day, this resistance that we are participating in. It's community-based. We are creating our own networks. We are creating our own ways to control information. That's what our resistance is all about. I don't know what alternatives there are, but we know that what we're doing is the basis for our longevity, our sustainability. We need to be able to continue passing our knowledge down from generation to generation. This knowledge that we have received from past generations, we need to be able to make sure that we can continue to pass that down. So we need to understand digitalization. It's definitely going to be a challenge for us in all different realms of our lives. We are fighting for positive relationships between human beings, but we're also working towards interconnection between different spheres in life. So our digital sovereignty and food sovereignty is, those are our ultimate goals. And the purpose of this is to guarantee the rights of peasants based on international agreements. I'll leave it there. Thanks very much to my brothers and sisters. Thank you, Perla. It's very important for us to have finished today with you, such a strong woman. You have been able to show us what we're capable of, and you've shown us that we have this very long-standing struggle that we've been bringing forth. And you've shown us the importance of this knowledge. And agricultural schools in Las Ayanas in Latin America, there are very important tools there with regards to maintaining knowledge and making sure that we don't lose this knowledge that's been passed down and that doesn't work via algorithms. It's, in India, in Africa, in Latin America, there are all these resistance movements. And that's why we're here, to be able to look at how we can come together on the regional level, but also at the international level, so that we can together face this digital era. So to conclude, I'm going to ask Veronica to take the floor to give us a little bit of, to look through questions and comments and be able to kind of bring together and conclude our talk. So, taking into account the questions and comments that you put in the chat, she will be giving us that summary. And lastly, if the presenters would like to make some final comments on the questions that are going to be asked, then we'll open the floor for them. Veronica, are you there?
Hola, hola Larissa, gracias.
Hi, Larissa, thank you. I've been following the questions, but mostly we've seen comments. We're very, very grateful for the fact that people have shared a lot of resources on local and national situations. We have some materials here now to be able to see what's happening in India, in Zimbabwe, in Ghana, Kenya. There are several different examples. So as organizers, what we have to do now is share this with everyone. We've also had a request for our panelists. They've been asked if they could share their presentations. So we will be organizing all of these materials together so that we can provide them to these people who are interested in receiving them. So those materials can be useful. Most of the comments have to do with the second part of this seminar or webinar. So how can we share this, or how can we turn this digital tsunami into something positive, and what are the limits of it? So this is kind of an open question. We've seen this asked in our respective organizations. How can we maintain our autonomy and continue our work in this context of digitalization? All of these decisions that are made by algorithms and so on are creating a context that really excludes human beings. This is what Jim mentioned in the chat. Farmers, or farms without farmers, markets without buyers, and so on. So if any of our participants today would like to make further comments, you can go ahead, and rest assured that we will be sharing the materials, and we'll be able to share the recordings, at least in English and in Spanish, on YouTube. Thanks. Thank you, Vero. We had approximately 100 people following us, and now we've got 80 left around the world. It's lunchtime in some places, of course. If anyone would like to take the next 5 to 8 minutes to share their thoughts on these challenges, how can we continue to fight for technologies benefiting small producers? If anyone would like to talk about that, the floor is now yours.
¿Más ninguém? ¿De los expositores o de la gente que está acá?
Anyone at all, either presenters, panelists or participants? That's it? Okay, so on behalf of ETC Group and Grain, we would like to thank you for being here together with La Via Campesina. We would also like to thank all of our participants who so kindly shared information and knowledge with us today, and shared information on your different resistance movements. We are going to continue paving the way. It's not an easy task, but it is necessary, and we are going to continue to face these crises together, and the climate crisis and the hunger crisis specifically. So thank you so much once again. It's been a pleasure to be with you, and we're going to be in touch soon to share those presentations with you and for us to continue working together collectively. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. See you soon.